One.
Action. Okay, thank you very, very much. I don't have an applause button, so you're going to have to just all do that. Um, okay, so you guys are going to put me to the challenge today because I want to cater to the folks that have these models. And I just want to double check. Look, we had a couple other entries. Stacy, Carmen, looks like Janice. If you can tell me what organ you have, it would be very helpful. And there was someone else that showed up in the middle of it. So I'll wait one more, I can't say second because then that would be fast. I will wait one more group of seconds. And MHC, if you could tell us what you have, that would be helpful. Carmen, you have your hand raised. Can you use the chat? Can you unmute and tell us what you own? And 3, 2.
I have
Go ahead.
Inspire.
Okay. And Stacy and Janice, if you can put it in the chat at some point, that would be great. So today's class, I'm focusing on the LC and the SE series. What I kind of put it as the intermediate, and because they're not, you know, we tend to do basic models or beginners models. We tend to say that the one keyboard models are our beginners models. You could also, it's a matter of opinion, the next model up, the first 2 keyboard models, it depends on the series. You know, some of the easy 4s, you could say that's the second model on the line. That particular model is way ahead of its curve, so it's really above a beginner's model. So I classify these group of instruments as what I call intermediate level, and that could be a broad range. But particularly Voyager, Carnival, Fiesta, that's LC. And just for the heck of it, I'm just going to tell you, not that this will be information you'll use for years to come, but the Voyager is LC7, Carnival is LC15. There's one called the Pageant, which looks just like this, less 4 buttons. That's a LC10. And then the Fiesta over here is LC25. And then if someone has a model that's an LC model, anything that we talk about will apply. Many of you have much larger or higher end models. Anything that we talk about should be applicable for the most part. And then there's the SE series. The SE series was the series that replaced the LC. If you noticed, everything that I mentioned in those models started with LC. And I don't know if that L had a meaning to it when they came out with it, but I just know that's what they called it from 1990, I want to say 97, 98 was the LC era through about 2001, 2, maybe even 3, depending on how far they carried those, because they kept introducing LC models. The S models came out in 2001, the first, what they call the SU. But about 2 or 3 years later, the SE series came out, and that was the ones that replaced the LC. So if anything, you get a little history lesson at no extra charge today, okay? So The LC, the SE series, we got Adventurer, that's a beginner's model, but you have Conductor, SE10 is a Regency, SE20 is the Odyssey, and then there's another one above it. So I'm going to be focusing on the Carnival, the Fiesta, the Voyager, Conductor, that model, and hopefully what I teach will apply to those who have larger models. So, but one thing about all of the models that I just mentioned is the reason why I group them together is even though the newer series does more, has some newer features, when that era of instruments were around from the 90s to the early 2000s to the mid 2000s, even to the late 2000s, you'll notice if you ever been in the store, if you ever look at brochures, or if you go online and look at pictures and all of those models, you'll notice that there was a common theme with the Lowry organs for many years, even since the early 90s. And that is that the panel and the overall panel and design has always been relatively the same. So, you know, I know someone has a Legacy, someone says they had a Premiere or something like that. Those panels are all the same, even though there's more on it. How the panel is set up was, I think, designed so that when someone went from one organ to another, I know some of you may have traded up once or twice over the years, maybe even 3 times. Ruth, I think you did it 3 times, right? And the good news is we have a new rule in 2021. If you buy 10 organs in a year, we'll cut you off and put you in OAA, Organs Anonymous Association. And the group is led by me, and I will instruct you how not to trade up so fast, but do it just right. No, just kidding. But one of the things that Lowry tried to do over the years was that, because we know that people will upgrade, and we hope they do, and the idea of that is that the panel was to remain the same even though there's more. So for example, I'll use these 2 models as an example. I'll refer to the Conductor and the Regency. So when you first power it on the LC series, I'm just pointing this out just in case, because there's some other people joining. On the LC series, what does not come on when you first power it on is the rhythm preset. Okay? On the SE series and on the EZs, the EYs, your rhythm preset or style setup automatically comes on as soon as you power up the instrument. So one of the things that I like to find about that button, it's very important that we utilize that button to our advantage, because it's a good starting point when you have a piece of music and you select the style that you want to use with that music. It gives you a nice, good, quick setup for that instrument. Now, I always like to tell the story, and I'll shorten it a little bit. But back before I joined Fletcher Music Centers, which was in 1993, in my early 90s, I got good enough on the guitar that I had a band, and we were able to play out. And, it was just 3 or 4 of us at times, and we didn't have a sound man, and we didn't have a bunch of fancy equipment. But before the show, we would always play, and I had to be the sound man. And we didn't have great equipment. We were just getting by. And how we did a sound check, like nowadays, even with Zoom, Joni and Sean can get on, and I could just play a little bit, and they go, how does that sound? Turn it up or turn it down. That's pretty much it. But when you're playing live for a group, the sound check, there's a lot of variables, because if there's 3 or 4 musicians, you gotta adjust the volume and the equalizers. And so what I do is we'd all play, and as we were playing, I'd walk all the way out, because there's 2 types of speakers systems. Speakers that are pointed at the band members that aren't that loud, and the speakers that go out to the crowd that is loud. A band would never use the speakers for the crowd. That's meant to be played for 30, 40, 100 people, whatever. Otherwise, you would really lose your hearing fast. But the monitor speakers are loud enough to hear what you're doing. So I'd have to do both. I'd go out to the front, and as we're playing, I go, oh, the bass is too loud. And then I go back and I adjust the volume on the mixer, and then I go back. and then I hear the drummer. Now drums are trickier because you have microphones on the drums and the cymbals and then the monitors. And then you had, after you did all of that, then you had to contend with the band members going, I can't hear, you got to turn me up a little bit, even though you have this meter that's saying, no, the bass is too loud. And this went on for 30 minutes just to get the sound check. Well, what's my point on all this? Rhythm preset is kind of like an instant sound check for you. So if I just turn on the organ, and for those of you who have rhythm preset on automatically, try this out. Turn it off first, and then pick a rhythm, and it's not going to be terrible, but the balance is not going to be what I would call ideal. Okay, now keep in mind, ideal is a matter of the person sitting at the bench. Okay, because as we age, I don't know if you know this, but our hearing changes a little bit. Yes, they adjust. Sometimes we could hear more or less. Owen, your hearing hasn't changed at all. He's got perfect hearing. It's commonly known that males tend to lose the high range and the ladies tend to lose the low range. And so when they're playing, especially when there's two members of the household, you'll have, someone that will tend to turn up the bass a lot, and then someone will turn up, they'll play like the trumpets. You'll notice a lot of people will play the horn sounds, and they can play up here, and it's so high pitched because if they can tolerate it, that's probably a sign that they have the high end of the loss. But anyway, so keep in mind that ideal's based on I'm lost for words, kind of an international ideal, okay, volume setting. So it's based on a meter going up and down on the bass, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes when I play, I tend to turn up my drummer and my bass a lot, particularly because when I'm playing some of the numbers, especially if they're faster, I like to be able to hear that beat. And if I don't, I'll get off time. And I've done it many times, and then I'd have to use FX to fill in. And then people thought I was doing it on purpose. Well, a lot of times it's because I lost track of time and I couldn't hear it. And when you're dealing with this equipment, we don't always get to hear it like we normally would. So anyway, so here's a big band, just turning it on, and here's the introduction. Okay, now you can hear the drummer, you can hear the band, and because this is, when you first power up a Lowry organ, all of the LCs, SEs, SUs, LX, A, all of those series, if you first power it up, you turn off the rhythm preset, if you don't touch anything, the first sound that comes on is a traditional, what they call a sweet Lowry organ sound. Okay? The E series, the EX, EYs, comes up with a different setting, and I can't remember right at the top of my head. What is it, strings? Joni, do you know? It's a different sound than the organ. It's usually like a piano on the bottom. And okay, so keep in mind that that's the power-up setting. So this is the power-up setting with the rhythm. And you'll notice you'll hear the chord slightly in the background. Now here's what I'll do so you can hear it. I'm going to turn off the band. Can you hear that chord holding? And let me turn off the chord so you can hear. Now that it's not there. Okay? So this is the setting that comes up. If I just turn it on, no rhythm preset. Now that sounds okay, but for you might be hearing it differently, but on my end, I hear the organ's just not loud enough for me, the melody sound. So what I would do is start adjusting things, okay? Well, rhythm preset will do what's called, a lot of people think it's just setting up a melody sound. It really isn't. It's doing a lot more. What it's doing is it's setting up a melody sound. For those of you who have an upper and lower split, it sets up the sound down there as well. It sets up, obviously by now you probably know, it also sets up a, an ideal tempo, okay? Um, Again, keyword is ideal, because if I want to play in the mood is a lot faster than 128. So this is a tempo that they think a lot of big band songs would be playing. And again, if someone is in this series of models, they're back when this model was introduced, it was kind of, we probably thought they might have been in the hobby for a year or so. All right, so I think they set the tempos. Now, they never set them up too fast all the time just because they get larger. But in this case, it's 128. If you go on another Lowry organ, I think on the higher models, they go up to 138. All right, so that's ideal. Now, I put on Rhythm Preset. Not only did it set up a sound for me, again, ideal. It's, in this case, the trombone. It set up a tempo 128, and believe it or not, in this case, it didn't even put on a sound in the lower. Okay? And as I look, the drum volume was adjusted slightly differently. And let's see what other volumes. And then there's an orchestral / lower volume. And in the conductor, DD, it's the same. Your orchestral and your lower is controlled by one volume, but it has it set it up a little bit differently. When I had it on power up, it was on 1, 2, 3 red bars. When I put on Rhythm Preset, it brought it down a bar, so it's 2.5. So again, this is an ideal setting. Now your ears are going to tell you, I want this a little louder, this a little softer, what have you. But I'll play the exact same thing. Now, if you notice, the trombone was very easily heard. To me, compared to the other setting, the organ was a little harder to hear. I could hear the drums just fine. The background was, it was like a perfect balance to me. Now, sometimes when I'm playing, I go, I'd like to feel a little bit more bass. Now, here's the caution I give you. It's okay to adjust a volume on an instrument, but be careful with overly adjusting it. What I mean is, or being aggressive in the adjustment. A lot of times people go, I need a little more, I want a little more bass. And then what they'll do is they'll come over to the bass and then they'll tap it up 2 or 3 times. Now, I don't know if you can hear it through the internet here, but the bass is quite a bit stronger now. I'm going to bring it back. Okay? So my encouragement is, if you're going to do any adjustment to something, because you're going to say, you know, I need this or I need this a little more, just remember, a slight adjustment is sometimes all you need. All right? Now, depending on the model you have, adjusting the sounds can be a little bit tricky, and I'll tell you why. On this model here, and I believe on the conductor, actually I'm 100% sure on conductor, the Regency as well, the Carnival and the Pageant, those models, the melody sound does not have a separate volume control. Okay? So if ever I have a setting on and I'm playing and that melody sound I think needs to be louder, well, you can't make it louder if there's no volume control. Okay? And keep in mind, guys and gals, keep in mind, if you have an instrument that has a volume control, I'm sure this has happened. This happens to me all the time on the Liberties, the Prestiges. I'm trying to remember what you all told me. All of those bigger models, you'll notice that you have a separate volume control. Sometimes that volume is set all the way up to max for that orchestral section, and you play the melody, and it's still hard to hear for your ears because of everything else. In that case, you still can't adjust that volume. You can't make it any louder if it's already loud at its loudest point. On the conductor and the Carnival here, it's kind of set the same way at its fullest volume. So how can I turn that down? Well, you don't. And how you compensate is going to the band. Okay? Now the band is broken up into two parts, technically three, depending on your instrument. Okay? Two of them are the most common, and are actually there is three. Your bass, your drum, and I'm going to say this two ways, meaning the same thing. Your orchestra, or Orchestra Plus, as a lot of the models call it. On the E series, they call it style. Let me take a quick, I'll be right back. I'm not going very far. I'm going up to the Inspire, all the way up to the front of the store, and I'm back real quick. Boy, I'm fast. I'm just kidding. It was right around the corner. It's called style. So basically the band. So you have the drummer. I'm going to turn off the band and just let you hear the drummer and the bass. Okay? So that's pretty obvious. And usually, here it says rhythm. So if we say drums, we're referring to rhythm or drums. And on the EZ series, EY series, for those of you who have it, it doesn't even say drums. There's a picture of a drummer. It basically means drum volume. On the S models, the A series models, let's see, it may from the A models, they actually say drums. So I'm gonna, if you want to write this down, if you're taking good copious notes here, drum, rhythm, or drum icon, that's all the same. That's the drummer. Okay. The one thing they didn't change is bass. Bass is bass. Okay. So if you have a separate volume for bass, and they're typically labeled in the orange, even on the E series, I'm looking beyond the bass volume are two orange buttons. I'm looking at a Prestige behind me, and there are bass volumes for the orange, so the A series. Okay. So there's your bass and your drummer. All right. Now, I'm going to bring in the rest of the band. Again, I'm going to give you two or three words here that mean the same thing because of the different models. Orchestration, Orchestra Plus. Let's see over here. It says Orchestra Plus on the A series. On the E series, it's probably listed as Style. On the SE, it's probably listed as Orchestra Plus as well. Here it says Orchestra /lower because they group those together. That is the volume of that orchestra. So watch this. Let me bring in back the band. You hear the guitar player, and then you're going to hear horns. So if you have just your traditional big band on, that's kind of similar. Now I'm going to turn it down. Whoops. Bad chord. Is that okay? I heard some static in there. All right. Don't wiggle the cord. Don't move. So now I'm going to adjust the volume for the orchestra in the lower. You can kind of hear. You can kind of hear it. It's very slight, isn't it? Very slight. Okay, let me bring it back up. All right. Now, I brought it all the way down, but not turning it off completely. I wanted you to see that it was still in there. Now, if I turn it up, listen. This is one of those, I don't hear enough of the band, and then they get aggressive in the volume, and then this is what happens. Now there's a little bit too much of the band. So that's why I say, when you're making adjustments, sometimes it's a simple one adjustment or two. Don't get too aggressive on the balances, okay? Now, another thing that can be done, and I believe based on what everybody told me, I don't know what everybody else has that's been coming in the fold here. One of the easiest ways, the reason you would want to do what I'm showing you is if you turn on the instrument, in this case I have a big band, rhythm preset, and it's set up to trombone, and I want to make an adjustment. Slight adjustments are good. The tricky one becomes the band. Okay, and here's a couple little tips that I frequently tell no matter what model someone has. But in this case, the drummer and the bass is fine to me. The band is okay to me, but sometimes I like to do some fun things with the band. And I do one of two things. Turn down the volume or turn up the volume, or I adjust the way the band is set up. Now, some of you have a button that says just Orchestra Plus on it. Some of you have a button that says Genie and Orchestra Plus. Some of you have a button that just says basic and Orchestra Plus, and I am going to literally walk away for 20 feet. Some of you, I think if you have like a fanfare or journey, some of you have a button that says just Orchestra Plus on it. Okay? So I hope you're writing that down so you can look on your instrument to see which one how yours is set up. Okay? Basic, the word basic and Genie are basically, no pun intended, they serve the same function. Okay? And Orchestra Plus, virtually every model has an Orchestra Plus button, just how yours is set up. Orchestra Plus represents the rest of the band. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is turn off both the Genie and Orchestra Plus. If you have a basic and Orchestra Plus, same thing. Okay? And all you're going to hear at this point is the drummer and the bass like I did earlier. Okay? Now, the Genie or the basic on the E series. Okay? Now, Dee Dee, you have a basic button. I'm not referring to the basic button, okay, on your model. Some of you have a basic rhythm style, okay? So don't get that confused. I want to point that out. Actually, most of us have a basic button for the rhythms. That basically means it is a rhythm style that is a basic rhythm. I'm not talking about that, okay? What I'm talking about is the Genie in the Orchestra Plus. And for those of you who have the, it's on the EY, Rialto Inspire, I think someone said Rialto Inspire, maybe, Aria, Marquis, Grand Marquis. You have in your section, you'll have an Orchestra Plus and right next to it a basic button, okay? That button is different than a basic rhythm, okay? Now, when both of those buttons are off, this is what you'll get. Just the drummer and the bass player. If you have just one Orchestra Plus button, all right, when you turn off that Orchestra Plus, what it does is it takes off all the band members but one band member. All right? And in this case, it would be like me having just the Genie button on, or for those of you who have the bigger models, the one basic button next to the Orchestra Plus. Now listen. Now do you hear something come in there? It's a guitar player, isn't it? You'll notice that it's just a guitar player. What the Genie button does is it usually sets up, and I'm going to say 99% of the time, because I haven't gone through every rhythm on every organ. I got to leave myself that 1% chance that I might be wrong. Most of the time, it sets up a guitar type sound or a piano type sound. Now listen, here's big band with just the Genie button on only. And Dee Dee, in your model, if you turn off your Orchestra Plus, it would be Genie only. So if you put on big band and turn off your Orchestra Plus button, you'll get something similar to this. Okay? And remember all those horn players? You don't hear them now, do you? So what I'm telling you now applies to everybody. If you got your standards Frank and the Count style, if you put on that style and you turn off the Orchestra Plus, you'll get probably a simple guitar type sound. Okay? Now, the minute I put Orchestra Plus on, listen. There's some horns in there. There's gonna be some saxophones. All right, etc. Now, let's do another one as an example. Here is Broadway, which I opened up with. I'll do it with the intro. That's a lot going on there. Now let's put on the rhythm. Now I'm going to turn off the Genie and the Orchestra Plus. Drummer, just the bass. There you go. Now if I put on the Genie, in this case, it's a string instrument, but you note it's one instrument only. And it's I like to tend to think of that as kind of a very rhythmic type of a sound. You'll notice that it's very consistent and rhythmically easy to follow. Okay? Now, as I bring in the Orchestra Plus, we're going to get a lot of other fancy musicians. Now in here, it's not as busy as the big band, but there's some strings in there. Watch what happens when I do oh, I shouldn't have talked at that point because it did something else in there, but and when you do the fill-in, all the other stuff comes in. Watch what happens if I do the fill-in without the Orchestra Plus. Oh, sorry, put the Orchestra Plus back on. Now, if I turn them both off, well, you're just going to get a plain old drum and a bass doing it. Now, let's try a different one here, Foxtrot. Now, Foxtrot tends to be, well, I won't say anything bad about it, but I'll just play it. We probably poke fun at this style because this has been around since the early 80s, mid-80s, and it's been around forever. And it was probably once upon a time one of the most popular styles we demonstrated back in the early 90s. If I had a new salesperson, I said, you better learn to play a song with that Foxtrot because people love that style, and you better find a song from Lawrence Welk, and it was that style. But if any of you ever watched Lawrence Welk, there was a lot of songs he did that sounded kind of like that. But there's a lot going on, and it's known to be a busy style. And what's happened over the years, a lot of people avoid that style because they're tired of using it, especially like us. We've been around since the late 80s playing these organs in the early 90s. It's like but as newer models came out and they kept that style on there, Lowry did things to allow us to use those styles differently. So I can do that same style and do something like this. Now, if you notice the background, can you hear? Here's without just the bass and the drum. Now watch this. So it's not a guitar in this case, it's a piano player. But you notice the rhythm, it's very easy to follow. Okay? So point is that if you went through every one of your styles and just turn off your Orchestra Plus, you'll find something about that you may like. But you'll also notice it's going to typically be the drum and the bass and just a piano or a guitar. In the Broadway case, it did more of like a pizzicato strings as a rhythm, but most of the time it's going to be a rhythmic sound like a guitar or a piano. And then when you push the Orchestra Plus, there's going to be a bunch more musicians. Now, what musicians are they? Depends on the style. So in this case, that's actually a pretty fun style. Actually, it's a great style during the holiday season. Remember this for next year. There's a lot of fun songs you could use with that style and not have this busyness going on all the time. And for those of you who have the drum variations and the alter styles, if you use your drum variation alter style without that Orchestra Plus, you'll find it doesn't sound anything like what you're hearing. But you have the ability to get a lot of use out of the styles that maybe even the ones you don't use as much. Okay? You go to another style. Actually, before I go any further, any questions? I saw it chatting earlier. I don't know if it was a question or any questions? I've given you a lot of information for 40 minutes. Hope.
I don't see anything.
Okay, now I'm going to give you a pop quiz next time around. All right. We're doing good so far? All right. So, as you pick other styles, here's the gospel. Pianos, organs. All right. Now I'm going to do the same thing without the Orchestra Plus. In this case, drummer, the bass, and just a piano player, which is kind of cool. I'm going to bring in the Orchestra Plus. Now, many students over time, as they learn to play and they get comfortable with more songs and what have you, many students, the left hand tends to be, how do I put this? A lot of times students tend to think that they really need to have a strong left hand. Okay? In this model, I noticed that almost every style that I set up, there's one that it didn't, most of the time did not set up a left hand sound. On the bigger models, the ones that it does set up a left hand sound, if you haven't noticed by now, pay close attention to it, it's always a very soft sound. You could barely hear it. And if there was any, I don't want to say complaint, concern that I've heard from students over the years is I can't hear the left hand. I can't hear the left hand. That's because it's done intentionally. Okay? Why is it done intentionally, Robert? Well, before automatic rhythm styles and accompaniments, when an organ player played, they played their melody, they played a chord, and they played the bass. Okay? And even back in the days when organs started to have rhythm, drum beats on them, they still played like that. What was the accompaniment part? The bass was the bass, and if we had a drummer that was put onto the machine, what was the accompaniment? The left hand. Okay? That's when they didn't have accompaniment. So what happened was, turn off all the automatics. Okay, here's my left hand chord. Here's the bass. All right. And then what happened was, adjust this on my side here, give me a minute. See if you can catch it on the left hand here. Play a song that's a little bit easy for me to show this off with. You notice what I'm doing with my left hand. What do they call that? Counter mentally, or I don't know what the actual term is, but you notice I'm not just holding the chord. See, that would be the just holding chord. That's a good starting point when someone's learning to play like that. But if you were playing an organ back in the day with no backgrounds, if you had a drum beat, you still had to do. That's a lot of coordination there. And then if you brought in the drum beat, you still had to do all of the work. Bass, and it was bass, and well, there's actually more complex bass patterns that you could play with your feet, but the simple was boom, boom. And then you had to hit the right notes. So that left hand was the accompaniment. Well, now when you have a rhythm style that has an accompaniment, what happens is that stuff going on in the background is more or less replacing what you did in the left hand. And so what a lot of people tend to do is that I want to hear my left hand, and then they'll put on some sounds in their left hand, and they'll turn it up, and then they do this. Now you got so much left hand. And then the melody just gets drowned out. Well, the last I heard, we recognize songs by the melody, not always the band. The melody is how we know, oh, that's that song. And the band accompanies the melody. So keep in mind that when you turn on your instrument, if it puts on a sound in the left hand, more than likely, and I'm 99.9% sure on this one, the volume is set soft, the lower chord sound is set soft enough, just enough to be heard so it doesn't drown out the background. And the way you adjust and work around that, if you want to hear more orchestra, is you can turn up the Orchestra Plus, or if you turn up or turn down the Orchestra Plus. If you want to turn up your lower volume, remember, don't be aggressive. One step at a time, because if you put too much lower, then you lose the melody, okay? And then if you have it the opposite direction, sometimes just turning down the Orchestra Plus or turning off the volume or turning off the Orchestra Plus completely. So for example, in this case here, the Foxtrot, Foxtrots, the big bands, those tend to be a little bit busier styles. See, I want to hear that trombone a little better. I can't turn up the trombone here. I could either turn on the Orchestra Plus or turn off the Orchestra Plus and listen. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to bring in a jazz organ and some strings and some full organ on the lower. Now I've got a bigger sound. Okay, so what I might do is bring back my Orchestra Plus. Since I got much more melody, I'm going to bring in the Orchestra Plus. Maybe throw our AOC. Why, thank you. Any questions? Questions? Please. Don't just sit there and stare at me like that. It makes me very uncomfortable. Ruth, quick, give me that dirty look, will you? Oh, no, she's giving me a pretty smile. Happy New Year, everybody, by the way. It's the first class of the year. If you have no other questions, I'm going to do a quick little announcement, and then I'll close off a little number. And I'll use some of these little tricks as I'm playing, okay? And believe it or not, these little tricks that I teach you, we all do it when we play. So next time you hear Joe Fontesha or Joni or one of us playing, and if you see us reaching up and touching some things, or listen carefully for the band, all right, and listen to the melody, because a lot of times what happens is if the band changes quite a bit, like either full or soft, you'll probably notice that the sound change in their melody sound also kind of goes accordingly. Just some simple stuff. All right. Now, I want to tell you, you probably all got an email late last night, but you probably saw it when you woke up. There was a email. Let me just pull it up real quick. This is going to be fun. I actually got this idea from um, someone that used to do this in their store, and this is going to be fun. We have an event this Friday at 11 a.m. Arizona time. That's 1 p.m. Eastern time. And I'm just looking for the email here so I can make sure I give you the right information. Maybe I can screen share it here. And let's see, here we go. Oh, there it is. Details. Hopefully my screen share will work. I think I have to update Zoom. It's been working properly, not properly recently. Okay. So you should have gotten an email that looks like this. Tell me if you could see this okay. Do I have to zoom in? You see something on the screen there?
Yes.
Okay. So it's called Zoom Musical Mishmash. Now, the funny thing is, my staff members don't know that they're participating yet, but now they do because a couple of them are on. It's going to be a real fun concert. We're going to play some of our favorite songs in a very unique way. And just stay tuned in because the more participation we have from our students, you're going to determine how we play those songs. Okay? So, like, a lot of us have songs that we play very well or we're comfortable, we really love to play. And I know Joni has some. Every time she plays a concert, I'm like, I hope she plays that one. I hope she plays that one. The Big Spender one is one of my favorites that she plays. This that dramatic kind of a sound that it has to it. So, and what we're going to do is have you are going to tell us how we're going to play those songs. Now, stay tuned in because we're going to. All you need to do is be there. We're going to make your life easy, and then you'll be able to use the chat or shout it out or something like that. So it's going to be a real fun event. That's Friday, January 8th. I hope I put the right date on there. The time is correct, 11 a.m. AZ, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you're somewhere else in the United States, you have to figure out, do the math. If you're across the country, I just look up the world clock. So with that said, I'm going to finish up with I'll finish up with a big band song, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit from whatever it was to I think 180. We'll see what happens here. And notice as I'm playing, as I reach up and hit some of the buttons, listen for the background to change along with it. Sometimes I'll bring in a lot of background, soften it up, depends on my melody sound as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's class. You really put me to the test today because many of you have models that I wasn't going to teach today. But Dee Dee, I hope you got something out of this. All right, here we go. All right, turn off the Orchestra Plus. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. We hope you enjoy today's class. Happy New Year, and
Happy New Year.
we'll see you Friday or tomorrow, depending on what organ you have. I'm doing the EX Elite class tomorrow. We have Joni is starting a styling arrangements made easy class tomorrow. That that there's an email coming out today to remind you on that. So watch your email. It's scheduled for an hour from now. It'll go out. He's doing four classes on Tuesdays. And then Wednesday, the variety class. I think Joe Fontesca is doing that one. So we got a really great educational week for everybody. And then we're going to cap it off with a great, fun concert. So thank you so much. Stay safe. Keep playing music. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye, Robert.
Bye-bye.